24-year-old male and was an Uber and Lyft driver for a couple years while I studied at college. I was lucky enough to own a fairly new car with great gas mileage, so driving people around was no big deal, and I always saw it as easy money. I've never been the most talkative guy though, so I usually just say hello when they get in and leave out all of the awkward small talk. Most of the customers I'd get were other college students who needed a ride back to the dorms or out to a house party or something. Due to my school schedule though, I'd mainly work between 6 p.m. and 2 a.m. depending on the day. This night, I'd started at 8, driving around 10 to 15 customers before eventually picking up a guy around 11 p.m. On the app, it showed his pickup location on the side of a small neighborhood road. This wasn't all that unusual, but when I pulled up to his location, I didn't see him anywhere. It was dark though, and the roads weren't very well lit. I pulled off to the side and put the car in park. Looking around, all I could see was a gate up ahead, blocking off the neighborhood from regular traffic, so I couldn't go any further anyway. I decided to try calling the guy since I didn't know what else to do, but after a couple rings, he declined it. Almost a second later though, the back door opens and a man gets in. I had no idea where he could have even come from, but I obviously assumed that I must have just missed him somehow.
"Hey, are you Tom?"
I asked, making sure it was my customer. He replied yeah quietly, so I shifted into drive and made a 3-point turn to get out of the neighborhood. I wouldn't say I'm the most cautious Uber driver at night, but I definitely pay attention to make sure I don't get stuck in a bad situation, so occasionally I'll glance in the mirror to see what they're up to. Doing this, I noticed something was off about the man. He looked like a normal 30-year-old man, but he almost seemed nervous, as he was fidgeting with his hands and staring at the floor. It was pretty weird, and it gave me a bad feeling. He requested a 15-minute drive to a house just outside of my college campus. About halfway through, things started getting much weirder.
"Hey, how close are we?"
He said it with a somewhat shaky voice, again like he was nervous. I told him we were 8 minutes away. A moment of silence passed before he leaned forward, partially between the front seats.
"Is everything okay, sir?"
He then immediately leaned back in his seat, but didn't respond. We made eye contact in the rearview mirror, but he looked away and began fidgeting again. Obviously, I knew something was off, so I took this chance to look at him in the mirror and try to see if he had any weapons. There were no signs of anything big like a gun, but I wasn't confident whether or not he had a knife. I tried to stay calm, but my brain kept going over all of the horrible things that could possibly happen to me really soon. We were just 4 minutes away, when the man leaned forward again, asking me if I could just pull over here and drop him off. Looking around, the road was quiet and there were no cars nearby, which did not make me feel safe at all.
Are you sure? Your stop is just a couple minutes away,"
I said, trying to convince him to let me keep driving so I could get to a safer area.
"No, drop me off here. I need to get off here."
I slowly pulled the car off to the side. I held my foot down on the brake, stopping the car but still keeping it in drive. I politely told him to have a good night, hoping he'd just get out. Of course, though, he stayed there. There was a really strange few seconds of total silence, as neither of us moved or said anything. Then the man suddenly jolted forward, reaching for my phone. I slammed my whole body into his, causing him to drop the phone in the crack between the seat. We continued to struggle as he reached around the front seat, frantically trying to grab anything he could find. The car constantly was jolting forward because I couldn't keep my foot on the brake. But after maybe 20 seconds and many unsuccessful attempts, the man leaned back and ran out of my car and off the road. I immediately drove off and away from the scene, calling 911. I was shaking and breathing heavily, trying to explain what had happened. Thankfully, they seemed to understand pretty well, though. To sum everything up, it turned out the guy was using his friend's Uber account and was found pretty quickly. I feel really lucky to have gotten out of that unharmed, as the guy didn't even bring a weapon. From what I know, he didn't have a history of violence or anything, so I guess that explains why he was nervous and unprepared. It almost seemed like he didn't even want to do it. I still drive for Uber and Lyft, but I stopped doing really late drives, and I'm definitely a lot more cautious about who I pick up. I'm a mover and truck driver for a large company that helps families move across the country. Mainly, me and a team of movers will go to a house that has prepared all of their stuff in boxes, and we load them up on our semi-truck along with their furniture. Then I take the truck and drive down to the new house and unload it with a smaller team of local movers that the company would hire. The biggest portion of my job is driving though, since we specialize in cross-country moving. I'd been at this job for 4 years at the time, and had been a truck driver for over 10 years. I'd heard about things like this happening, but I never thought I would be put in a situation like that myself. The move was from lower Tennessee to upper Michigan, not the longest drive compared to my usual, but still a full day trip. We finished loading everything up by midday, and I began the drive at 2 p.m. The first several hours were completely normal. I drove about 6 hours without a single stop, before eventually pulling over to get some food. I continued on again for another hour. At this point, I was in the lower to mid part of Illinois, which is all plain farmland. The highway narrows down to a long single-lane road with nothing other than an occasional farm or forest on the sides. As I drove through the darkness, with nothing but my headlights shining on the road, a small light appeared far in the distance ahead of me. As I got closer, it was more clearly a car's blinking hazard lights. However, I could see both the front and the back headlights blinking, indicating to me that the car was parked sideways on the road. I slowed down, knowing I'd have to carefully maneuver around them into the oncoming lane. Once I was about 100 feet away though, another car was visible in my headlights. It was parked with its front almost touching the other, but all of its lights were completely off, explaining why it wasn't visible at a distance. Together, the two cars completely blocked both sides of the road. I stopped my truck about 20 feet away, leaving it on as I looked at the situation. Initially, I thought maybe they had an accident, but I couldn't see any damage to either car, and they both seemed to be parked almost perfectly. Of course, I started getting nervous at the possibility of a surprise attack, so I grabbed my small pistol that I kept holstered in the center console. It did make me feel safer, but I'd never had to use it before, and if there was a group of people planning an attack, they were almost sure to be armed as well. What really confused me though, was the fact that the hazard lights of one of the cars was on. It seemed like that would give away the fact that there was a roadblock, and just didn't make sense to me. I stayed in the truck and looked all around the scene and the side of the road for any signs of someone being there, but there was no one. There wasn't really any way to turn the truck around, and even if there was, the nearest detour was miles back and would add several hours to the drive. It just wasn't an option. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, nervously swiveling my head around, expecting someone to come out at any second. But, after not even the slightest of noises or movement, I decided to check on the cars. I was absolutely terrified though, and even flicked the safety off of my gun before leaving the truck. Once I got out, I stood right by the open door for a whole minute, hoping I'd be able to jump back inside if someone decided to jump me early. But then I slowly made my way towards the small car with the hazards on. The headlights from my truck shined through the whole inside of the car, and there was nothing unusual. It was actually really clean inside. I tested the door handle, and it was unlocked. It made me really uncomfortable that someone would leave their car unlocked in the middle of a road like this, but inside I noticed the car was in neutral. I looked towards the back of the car, and there was nothing but a flat field of grass. So after glancing around the area one more time, I went to the front of the car and began pushing. It only took a few seconds for it to start moving, and once it did, it continued down fairly easily. The front of the car was still slightly on the road, but there was still enough space between the two cars for my truck to fit through. But as I started walking back to my truck, I heard a loud voice yell in the distance. I turned around and could see a figure down the road sprinting towards me. I ran straight for the truck and got inside. In the headlights now were two more men, running alongside him with something in their hands. By the time I got the truck to start moving, they were already right by the two cars, still sprinting towards me. I lined it up to go between the cars and ducked my head down slightly as I drove past them, just in case they started shooting. Thankfully, I was able to make it out unharmed, and got a good distance away without any signs of them following. I tried calling the police soon after, but had no signal until 30 minutes later when I got closer to a small town. I told them about it and said I wasn't sure if they needed help or if it was a trap, but that it felt really unsettling. There's a chance that I just pushed an innocent person's car off the road who needed help, but it all seemed too well situated for that to be the case. I just don't understand why they were all so far up the road if they were planning an attack, but whatever the reason was, it might have saved me from something horrible. I nanny two amazing children for a single mother who's the owner of a pretty successful small business, which means she can't be home for her children as much as she wants to. The children had a play this one Friday night that their mother couldn't attend, so of course I stood in for her. The play ended at 7, and we had to hurry home so that the kids could eat and be in bed by 8:30. They usually had to wake up early for their respective sports practices. It was fall, so the sun went down pretty early, and by the time the play ended, it was pretty much pitch black outside. I got them settled in the back seat, and then we headed home. The family lived pretty far from the school, in a really nice neighborhood where your neighbors are a good walk away and you're pretty secluded from everyone. Most of the drive is a winding road with very few street lights. There's no sidewalks, and the road is so narrow that you almost can't fit 2 cars. Luckily, no one really goes on this road though, as there's only really 4 or 5 residences in this particular subdivision, which is why I found it odd when a car started trailing me real close. I thought it must be just one of the older people in the area who can't see well, so I ignored it until they turned their brights on. The speed limit was 15 the whole road, so I decided to pull over so they could go around me. I wasn't about to speed up on a road like this when I could barely see. However, the moment I pulled over, they pulled over too. Panic fell over me, but my mind tried to reason. If they're going down this road, they probably live here. Maybe my brake light was out or something. I looked in my rear view as a man got out of the car and waved. I locked the doors as precaution and rolled down my window slightly. He approached the car with a smile and asked me if a certain address was down this street. I didn't recognize the address, so I said no. I noticed though, as he asked the question, he kept looking at the kids in the back. Obviously, this made me very uncomfortable. I told him I really had to get home and apologized. He looked disappointed.
Those are some cute kids you got back there. What's your guys' names?
That was the last straw. I told him goodbye and I slowly started to press on the gas. Just as I started to move forward, he tried to grab the door. Then he punched the trunk and yelled after me as I drove away. The kids started to get frightened and I tried my best to remain calm. I called the police and explained exactly what happened, but while I was explaining, I saw headlights behind me. He started honking his horn aggressively. The operator told me to stay on the phone and that they were sending officers. He was tailing me dangerously, and I knew that if I even tapped the brake, he would crash into me. We were almost to the first home on the street, and I was praying with everything in me that the people who lived there were home. I wasn't about to lead this guy straight to where the kids lived. As we approached the house, I started honking incessantly. The guy behind us had let up and slowed down as I turned into the driveway of the home. I saw an older lady look out her window and a wave of relief came over me. The lady and her husband came out and I explained everything, and just a few minutes later I heard police sirens in the distance. They took my report there and escorted me and the kids back to the house. Their mother showed up about an hour later, and after I told her everything, she asked me what he looked like. I described the man as best I could, and she just stood there, frozen. After a bit, she finally said,
He found me.
I asked who, and she replied,
My ex-husband.
Apparently, several years ago she had gotten a restraining order due to several incidents where her ex-husband tried to take her kids, so I guess this wasn't the first time things like this had happened. Thankfully though, I never had to see him again, as the police were able to find him fairly easily. This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and backseat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but was also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m., but with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me, but for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around 10, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank, and as I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. But regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable.
Hi, do you need something?
I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding.
Take the exit back onto the highway.
I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself.
Take the exit back onto the highway.
After a second, I said okay, and the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man, who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it though, the more crazy that man seemed, just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something, so I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows, and once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all, almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess. Or at least that was what I assumed he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount, and then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying, basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a ripoff like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped in my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that. Very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops, and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road, going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark, with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by, then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. I was delivering a truckload to a company on the far west coast, coming from the east coast. The route across the country is one I've taken many times before, being a truck driver for almost 20 years. It's always the same every time I make one of these drives. Same roads, same truck stops, and same everything. Over these 20 years though, I've never really had anything crazy happen. I've had a few odd scenarios, but they'd never amounted to anything. So when I was driving this route again, I had no worries in my mind. It was just another day on the job. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at. As I drove though, a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something. I didn't know, but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back. but then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane though, and to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead, so at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior, but as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried as I was coming in on the truck stop. I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty though, aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief, grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shut-eye. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up though, I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off, and 2 men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them, and as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear onto the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware, and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. I've been a taxi driver in the big city for over 15 years, specifically Chicago, but I used to live in Las Vegas and worked as a driver there as well. Recently, I know a lot of new methods of getting around have been coming up, like Uber, but this happened to me years ago, before that even existed, or at least before it was commonly used. For context to those who aren't familiar, Chicago has cold, nasty winters, and the temperatures drop to freezing all the time. The taxi service I worked for wasn't the typical yellow taxi car type job you used to see all the time. This, at the time, was a more modern type of job, where you use your own car and put a sign on top whenever you're working, so that people know that you're a taxi. In return, the company takes a portion of your earnings, but this way, you can work whatever shifts you want and can charge what you feel is necessary. At the time, this felt like a luxury I never wanted to end, but it didn't last forever. I never set a schedule for myself, so I would just go out and drive whenever I decided on any given day. During the holidays, I worked more hours though, since more people are out and about. I didn't have any family nearby at the time, and I lived alone, so holidays were just like any other day for me. This unfortunate event took place on Christmas Eve. I began driving at 10 a.m. and was very pleased with the amount of business I was getting. There was almost no downtime between customers, and they were willing to pay more due to how busy it was, which meant I was making nearly $80 an hour, which was really good for me. By the time 8 o'clock came, I had been working 10 hours, but was still making great money. However, snow started falling. It was light still, but I figured I still had time before it got worse. I took a quick stop at a fast food place to grab a bite to eat, then headed back out to work as much as possible while I could. The crowds were dying down, but a lot of other taxi drivers had gone home as well, which meant I had less competition. I picked up a small group from a large road and took them home. They lived in a relatively low-quality neighborhood, with very close together old homes. The group was nice though and left a good tip. As I was pulling away from the side of the road though, a man came from behind a parked car and held his hand out as if wanting a ride. It was hard to see him through the snow and darkness, but he had a dark hoodie on, and as I got closer, he almost looked nervous. But honestly, this wasn't uncommon around here. I pulled up next to him and he got inside.
Where you heading?
I asked, continuing forward again. As I rolled down the street for a few seconds though, I realized he still hadn't answered. I spoke again, more punctual this time, asking where he needed me to take him. I looked in the rearview mirror as I asked, and the man made eye contact for a second before looking away. Then he spoke.
Just take me here,
he said, pulling a small piece of ripped paper from his hoodie pocket and handing it to me. On the paper was a poorly written address on a street I was unfamiliar with. Having driven in the city for years, I'd at least heard of almost all the road and street names, so this made me pretty confused. My initial thought was that it may be a far drive outside the city, and in that case, I wasn't sure if I could do it. At an empty stop sign, I reached over to my rarely used GPS and typed in the address. Nothing came up. I started to get nervous, looking back at the paper and GPS to make sure I typed it in right.
Sir, I don't know where this address is,
I said as I turned my body to face his. Yeah, just pull over here, he said in a surprisingly strict tone. I was pretty sure what was happening, but I remained calm and pulled over on the side of the road. This street was pretty much empty. No cars, no people, no lights. I put the car in park and just sat there, looking forward. The man turned around for a second, looking out the side window, then immediately lunged his body between the front seats and grabbed my head, pressing a small gun to it. He was screaming things at me, asking for my wallet and keys and everything, but I was in so much shock and all I could focus on was the pain due to how the man was aggressively digging the barrel of his gun into my skull. This only angered the man further, and he continued yelling as I tried to grab my wallet, but I guess I wasn't fast enough. He pistol whipped me in the back of the head, making my vision blurry and sending a rush of pain through my head as if I suddenly had the worst headache imaginable. Dazed and barely conscious, I tossed my wallet on the passenger seat. I don't even know what I did wrong this time, but he hit me again, worsening everything. I'm assuming the man noticed my condition though, as he took the opportunity to get out of the car. But that was the last thing I remembered. I woke up on the side of the street, what seemed like just a few minutes after the attack. I was covered in snow and was freezing. My car was gone, as well as my wallet, keys, and phone. My head was killing me and I could barely manage to walk. Shivering and in pain, I made my way through the snow-covered sidewalks to a nearby gas station and got help. In short, my car was found a week later further outside the city, abandoned on the side of the road. Thankfully, I had no lasting injuries, but getting a new phone, license, bank card, everything was just a hassle. Without my car, I couldn't work either. The whole thing was just awful, not to mention the terror I felt in the moment. What really bothers me was how aggressive the guy was for no reason. I mean, if the guy just asked me for my shit, I would have given him no trouble. I just don't understand why it had to go down the way it did. Clearly his goal wasn't to kill me, so why did he have to hurt me so badly if I was complying? Since then, I started working for a larger taxi company run by the city, where they give you a car and everything. It makes me feel safer, but I still find myself getting uneasy around certain people. Luckily, I can choose to not work nights though, and on holidays, I make sure to be much more careful because I found out the hard way that just because it's Christmas doesn't mean all the horrible people take the day off too. I was on the road during a small snowstorm and had been driving for about 8 or 9 hours already. I say small snowstorm because it was much more snow than a regular snowfall, but not as much as a typical blizzard you'd probably imagine of a normal snowstorm. I was delivering a few pallets to a warehouse for the company I worked for, but I was ahead on time, so I didn't feel any need to go quickly, especially not with the snowfall. I was on a dimly lit highway and had my brights on when I could see in the distance a flashing and flickering light. Getting closer, I realized it was much larger and brighter. It was a deep red, and that's when I realized it was a fire. The snow falling down made it too difficult to tell if it was on the highway or off to the side, but either way, I was gaining on it fast. I tried to brake slowly, but I had completely misjudged how close I was, so I pressed down harder. I could feel the back trailer starting to slide behind me, and I immediately let go of the brakes, causing it to straighten but jolt back and shake the whole truck. It was terrifying, trying to keep the truck from tipping over and not slide into the fire. Closing in on it though, I realized it was off the side of the road, and while it was a relatively large flame, it seemed to be centered in a single spot. I was able to get the truck to stop safely on the side of the highway as I leaned over and looked out the passenger window. At the tree line next to the road, I could barely make out a small car at the center of the flames. I was in awe at the sight, never having seen anything like it. I quickly undid my seatbelt and got out to see if anyone was hurt. Staying a safe distance away, I tried to look around the scene for anyone. I didn't know how it could have caught on fire, and the car seemed pretty normal. Aside from the burn marks, it kind of looked like a regular parked car, not damaged or anything from any sort of crash. Not seeing anyone nearby though, I feared the worst, that someone may be inside the car. I pulled my phone out and called the police. I was thankful to have enough service to get a hold of them, but they were 15 minutes out, and firefighters and ambulances were even further out. The more I stood there in the cold waiting for the police, looking at this huge flame coming from what seemed like any other car, I started wondering if it was intentional. Now, I'm no detective, but it just didn't look like an accident in any way. My body shook at the thought, and I turned around to get back in my truck.
Hey, hold up.
A man called out from beside me, maybe 30 feet away, but was masked by the falling snow. I looked in that direction, heart starting to race, as two men walked up to me. They were wearing face masks, covering their mouth and nose. I greeted them and asked if they knew about what happened here, and they both shook their heads, which was really odd considering I didn't see or hear them pull up in any car. There was no way they walked here in the middle of nowhere on a highway, so I obviously started getting a really bad feeling in my gut.
I'm gonna get back in my truck and get going. Have a good night, guys.
I said, beginning to walk, trying not to seem afraid.
No.
One of the men said strictly. I turned back around, and in that moment, I faced the most terrifying thing in my life. The man had a handgun pointed right at me. I told him I would comply with whatever he wanted, and then he told me to move and stand against the trailer. He aggressively patted me down, taking my wallet and phone, while the other man robbed whatever he could find in the front of the truck. I was trying to hold in tears as I was thinking about my family and how this might be it for me. I was almost sure that they had lit that car on fire now, meaning they likely robbed someone just like me, and I didn't see anyone else around, so we all know what that probably meant. After a minute, the second man reapproached us. He put his hand on the man's shoulder who was holding the gun and leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Then, just like they came, they both rushed into the dark, disappearing through the thick snow. I was in shock, still standing against the truck, before running inside and locking the doors. I didn't have my phone or wallet, so I just stayed and waited for the police to arrive. This whole thing was a big deal in the area for a while, though it happened many years ago. The car was set on fire by the two men, and unfortunately, I was right. They robbed an old lady who was pulled over, and burned the car to make sure no evidence of them was left. They were caught not long after, eventually giving details on where the body was, but they never gave an explanation to why they went back to the scene when they saw me. It could have been to rob me, just as they had done, but it seemed like a big risk for little reward. Most of all, I don't know why they chose to let me live, considering what they had just done to the previous victim. I am grateful though, and I hope nobody else has to go through something like that. My advice is that if you see something, just stay in your car, lock the doors, and call the police. Don't go trying to help, because there's always a chance that it's going to end up being you who needs help. I was a normal pizza delivery driver for Domino's in high school. I also worked part-time at a Jimmy John's on the weekends, but that was just a side job. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there so that you know I'm not just some random guy doing his first delivery. I was very familiar with making food deliveries, and what happened on this night was not normal at all. 90% of the time, I don't take the phone calls. Usually there's someone in the restaurant that takes the orders and gets the pizza ready. Then I just run inside, grab it, and go. This time was no different. I just finished with the previous order and ran inside the shop to pick up the next order. As I grabbed it though, my coworker told me to make sure the guy pays in full. It was an obvious statement, so the fact that he felt the need to say that was weird. I was in a rush because of the snowy roads though, so I just said okay as I walked out. Getting in my car and situating myself, I thought about it a bit more, and then actually wondered why he said that. I settled on the idea that it was probably just some upright guy that was trying to get discounts. I began the drive, and if I remember correctly, it was just 10 minutes away from the shop. I should mention, it was just past 10 PM, so the roads were mostly empty, but as soon as I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a car speeding up behind me until he got close, then he eased off and matched my speed. I couldn't tell what type of car it was, but it isn't uncommon for people around here to go crazy fast at night when no one else is on the roads. That being said, the snow was falling a good amount, so going fast probably wasn't the best idea. I kept my speed and just casually drove, hoping he'd just go around me or turn off somewhere. But he stayed. It wasn't until we reached a traffic light that the person pulled into the lane next to mine. I always just stare ahead at traffic lights so that I don't make awkward eye contact, but someone started yelling from the car next to me. I looked over, seeing a man staring right at me with his window rolled down. I quickly broke eye contact and looked forward again, but the guy started yelling again, asking me to roll the window down. I pretended not to hear him and started fiddling with the pizza bag next to me as if I were searching through it. I kept the traffic lights in the corner of my eye though, and as soon as it turned green, I quickly sped down the road. The man didn't stop though. He continued next to me, driving erratically and swerving all around. His window was still down, and I could see he was constantly trying to stare at me and get my attention. The man looked angry though, so there was no way I was stopping to talk to this guy, but I was getting really annoyed. I wasn't even scared, just bothered by this guy. I wanted to take a side road or something to try and lose him, but the snowy conditions made me question whether or not the side roads would be plowed yet. I was not in the mood to get stuck in the snow with this crazy dude, so I just took my chances and stayed on the main road. Only 1 to 2 minutes away from the house, the guy, still beside me, sped up and immediately swerved into my lane in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, but it only slowed my car slightly before it began to slide. Luckily for me, the other guy had the same problem. His car continued sliding all the way off the road and into the thick snow. His car had almost completely turned 180 degrees too. My adrenaline was making me shake as I rolled down the road slowly, looking in my mirrors at the guy's car. I then picked up some more speed so I could put some distance between us, though I didn't think he'd be able to get out of there for a while anyway. I felt bad for leaving him like that, but he clearly had bad intentions, and I was not going to stay there to find out what they were. I pulled into the driveway of the customer's home and walked up to the front door, knocking several times. After a minute of no answer, I called my boss, who then called back the number to tell them I was there. Still knocking and ringing the doorbell, my boss called me a minute later to tell me that he didn't pick up. I stood there, confused, looking at the lights that were left on in the house. Then I started to put the pieces together. I ran back to my car and drove out of the neighborhood. I took a different route to the shop just to make sure I avoided that car, then told my boss what had happened. I believe the customer was the guy in the car. My boss said he gave him a bad feeling on the phone, making him think that he wasn't going to pay. I think the guy's plan was to follow me out of the shop, then get me to pull over so he could rob me, either of the pizza, my wallet, or both. It made sense that the man wasn't at home too, because he had gotten stuck in the snow. I don't know for sure. I could just be overthinking all of it, but my boss agreed with my theory. He said he would notify the police and give them the guy's number and address, although he never updated me about it, so I'm not even sure if he actually did. But as far as we know, that guy hasn't called the shop since. I was driving alone from my friend's place all the way back home. He lived about an hour away, at some really remote house. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. I can't remember exactly, but I was really tired and almost just wanted to sleep over at his place. I would have had to call off work though, which wasn't really an option. Because of where he lived, most of the drive was through large farmlands. I had some music playing to keep myself awake, and I just stared at the empty road ahead. About 20 minutes in though, my headlights lit up something right in the middle of the road. I slowed down, slamming on my brakes a bit harder than I had to. It was a suitcase, like a full, unopened suitcase, just standing up in the middle of the road. I probably stared at it for an odd amount of time because I was so tired and caught off guard by it. I decided to just go into the oncoming lane and go around it. I really wasn't in the mood to get out and move it or anything. It was definitely odd that it was standing upright like that, but it had to have just fallen out of someone's truck and happened to land like that. I couldn't think of any other reason. I kept driving, thinking about it for a little bit, but ultimately forgetting about it pretty quickly. Maybe 5 minutes passed. The roads were still quiet. I was just cruising along, but then again, something came up in my headlights. This time, it was a truck, parked in the middle of the lane. None of its lights or blinkers were on. If I didn't have my high beams on, this could have been dangerously close. I stopped behind them and waited for a second, then honked a few times. The truck didn't move at all. I didn't even see any movement inside of it through the back window. After waiting for 30 seconds, I started to slowly go around it. As I did, I noticed it had a few large dents and scrapes on the side. I couldn't tell if it was from a recent accident or not. It could have been one of those old trucks that just never repaired any of its parts. More concerning though, I didn't see anyone inside the truck. It was still dark looking through the windows, but I didn't see any shape or outline of anyone sitting in either the front or the back. I pulled further up and in front of it, getting back onto my side of the road, then slowed even more to look around. It was still just farmland in all directions. Why would someone park right there and leave their vehicle? There was nothing here. I felt strange about it, kind of creeped out honestly. I continued down the road. I just had a bad feeling about it, and I didn't want to stay too long to see it through. After that, I was definitely more awake. Was the suitcase and the truck somehow connected, or were they both just conveniently in the middle of the road? I never saw anyone on the side of the road going back to get the suitcase, so I don't know. But I only made it another minute before I was forced to stop for a third time. There was a person in the road. He was standing in my lane and waving his arms at me to stop. He looked early 40s and pretty disheveled. Messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms, and overall just not in good shape. Once my tires stopped moving, he smiled and walked up to my window. "Hey, did you see a truck not too far back that way?" I said yes, I did. "Think you could give me a lift back there?" Before answering, I asked why it was parked in the road like that, and what he was doing out here, which I felt like given the circumstance, these were reasonable questions to ask. The man stumbled over his words for a second, before settling on saying he ran out of gas and was trying to walk to a gas station. But then, why would I drive him back to the truck? Wouldn't he have asked me to drive him to the gas station? He kept talking though, like he wasn't letting me think too hard about it. Now it was me stumbling over my words, trying to think of an excuse to say no, but my eyes wandered behind him and happened to see something sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. It looked like the tail end of a small car. It was deep into the crops. I could only see one of the rear headlights slightly reflecting the light from my car. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew whatever it was wasn't good. I rolled the window up, and the man instantly went from smiling to frowning. His eyes widened, and he started yelling and hitting the window. I pulled away and sped down the road. I got my phone out quickly after and called the cops. Reportedly, the truck was gone when they got there, but the car I saw in the crops was still there, and I guess the scene was far worse than I imagined. That was someone else's car, and the driver in it was no longer alive. Not from a crash, though. It seemed they likely picked up a hitchhiker, the guy I saw, and unfortunately, that was the last thing they ever did. It's assumed that the suitcase and the truck in the road had something to do with getting the car to pull over and pick him up. It's not for certain, though, but obviously the hitchhiker I saw was not telling the truth about his truck running out of gas. It all likely was just an act of violence by some crazy guy for no real reason, which makes it even more terrifying that I was that close to him, and he wanted me to let him in my car, just like the other guy had. The man was never identified. I'm 32 and work for a trucking company. This was around the holidays. The roads weren't too bad for the most part, but driving in winter was always a little bit more tiring. This day, or night rather, was normal. I left town at 6 p.m. to deliver a load 2 states away. At about 11 p.m., I made my first stop. I pulled into a small truck stop on the side of the road, just to use the bathroom and grab a coffee, and maybe rest my eyes for a little bit. I parked and went into the building, then came back out with my coffee and hopped back into the driver's seat. I took a moment to myself and just sat there, taking a few sips and looking around. Only a couple other trucks were in the parking lot. Guess it was a quiet night. As I sat there, I happened to spot someone at the back of the building. The lights were dim back there, but some guy was leaning against the wall and looking out in my direction. I couldn't see his eyes, but my truck was the only one parked over here. There was nothing else to look at. I minded my own business and just kept sipping my coffee, but every time I looked back, the guy was still looking over here. I was sure it was nothing, but it still felt too weird for me to get any shut-eye. Snow was starting to come down as well. I put my drink in the cup holder and started up the truck, then pulled out and began the next section of the drive. The coffee definitely kicked in, keeping my eyes open. The roads were completely empty. About 30-ish minutes down the road, a light glimmered in my side mirror for just a moment, like a glint reflecting off of something behind my trailer. I kept checking my mirrors, thinking it was a car coming up, but there was nothing behind me that I could see. Maybe it was a broken reflector on the road or something. I didn't know. The snow was beginning to pile up a bit on the road though, so for the next while, I was more focused on what was ahead of me, making sure I made it in one piece. I think a good hour or so went by. Focusing on the road was getting more exhausting with every minute. But then again, there was a quick glint in my side mirror. I only barely shifted my eyes quick enough to catch what it was. There was a car right behind my trailer, like so close that it was completely covered in my mirrors. Its headlights were off too, so only when it was slightly off to the side did my headlights reflect onto theirs, creating that little glint I was seeing. I was no stranger to having people tailgating me for going slow, but this was really strange though, in this weather, being that close to me and with no headlights. What were they doing? After a minute or two of thinking about it, I thought it best to get away from them, or at least keep them off my tail, for both of our safety. I merged into the other lane, but the car followed. Confused, I merged back into the right lane. This time I think they got the hint that I was onto them, and they stayed on their side. They started to slow down though, and eventually they fell out of sight. I didn't have a clue what they were doing, but at least they were off my back. I drove on the quiet road through the snow for another 2 hours. It was around 3 a.m., and I decided to pull off at a rest stop to get a few hours of shut-eye. It was just one of those little cutaways off the road that could fit maybe 2 or 3 semis. There was no building or restrooms, it was just a parking area. I parked, cut off the engine, leaned my chair all the way back, and closed my eyes. I dozed off pretty fast. I was used to being limited on sleep, so every minute counts. The calm winds and snow trickling down definitely helped though. I planned to wake up whenever the sun came up, so like 3-ish hours, but I woke up before that. I slowly opened my eyes, seeing the dark truck cabin and the faint highway lights in front of me. I was still really tired. I didn't know why I woke up. After a second, I rolled my body over to reposition myself, but was instantly met with the eyes of something outside my window. They were staring in at me with disturbingly wide, creepy eyes. I almost fell out of my seat, but the guy didn't even flinch. He just stepped down and tried to open the door, but after a few tries, I heard his footsteps rushing away in the snow. I used the radio to call for help, and moments later, a car drove out from behind my truck. It was the same one that was on the road before. I gave as much of a description as I could, and it was as the officers asked me to go over everything that happened that night that I remembered the man I saw watching me at the truck stop. Maybe it was him this whole time. But why was he stalking me, and what was he trying to do? I never found out. I was 16. I had just gotten a job at a pizza place about 6 months ago, and during that time, I saved up enough to buy a cheap car. I hated not being able to drive myself, but also I wanted to do deliveries instead of working inside the shop. It was a regular weeknight. I got in after school at 5 and was scheduled until 10:30. It was busy for the first couple hours, but by 8 it abruptly slowed down. There wasn't another delivery to be made until 9. It was an online order for just 2 medium pizzas. I picked it up and started driving. It wasn't busy out, just a few cars here and there. But once I got about 5 minutes out from the neighborhood, a car pulled onto the road from a side street and came up behind me. The roads were empty, and they could have easily passed me if they wanted to, but they stayed right behind me. I didn't really think about it. I mean, to be honest, I didn't care at all at the time. Throughout the next 5 minutes, they stayed right behind me. When I took the turn into the neighborhood, I looked in my mirror. After a few seconds, their headlights appeared, turning down the road. That's a pretty big coincidence. What were the chances that the only other car on the road was going to the same small neighborhood as me? I guess it was very possible, but it got me feeling a little more aware of the situation. I kept driving. This street was through the woods, with individual houses spread out on either side of the road. Some were right up on the road, and some were down longer driveways. As I got deeper into the neighborhood, finally my headlights lit up a mailbox that had the right address on it. I turned into the driveway. I checked my mirrors again, and a few seconds later, the car passed right by and continued down the road. I remember feeling relieved and silly for thinking anything of it. I drove to the end of the driveway. It wasn't too long, maybe like 200 feet or something. I pulled up and got out with the pizzas. I gave the door a couple knocks. Nobody answered the door for a minute, and while the porch light was on, it didn't look like any of the inside lights were on. I knocked again. About 30 seconds passed. Then a light shined through the window, and a few seconds later, a woman answered the door. She looked like she was in her early 30s, and was wearing a nightgown, and she looked really tired. Immediately, something about this felt wrong. I had these pizzas ordered to this address. I then read out the address to her, but she looked annoyed. The woman said she didn't order anything, and was trying to sleep. She was definitely a little cranky, but it was clear there was some kind of mistake. I apologized and walked off the porch. I was kind of spaced out for a moment, looking at the ground and thinking about how weird this was as I walked back to my car. But about halfway there, I looked up and felt a chill rush through me. There was a car sitting right behind mine. It was the same one that I thought was following me. Its headlights were off, but I could see the fog coming from the exhaust, so the car was still on. I felt really uncomfortable. Did they also live here with the woman and were just pulling in? Or did it have something to do with the order? Everything just felt really off, like too coincidental. I knew something was wrong. I continued walking to my car, hoping they would see me and either say something or move. I got in and tossed the pizzas on the passenger seat and turned my car on, but they stayed there. The driveway was thin. There wasn't really any space to go around them, but I pulled further up toward the house and turned around. Surely they would see that I was trying to leave now. They still remained right in the middle of the driveway, blocking the exit. There was about 30 seconds as I faced their car and they faced me, and we both just sat there. During that time, I kind of put everything together. Them driving behind me, following me into the neighborhood, and the creepy, sudden appearance of them blocking the driveway. None of this was a coincidence. I felt my body start to go numb as my heart started pumping in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Then, their car doors opened. 4 men got out. They all had hoodies and hats on, covering pretty much their whole faces. One of them had their hand suspiciously tucked into his hoodie pocket, like he was holding on to something. They started running up to my car, and I panicked. I hit the gas, trying to go around them and past their car, but there wasn't enough room. The wheels went off the driveway, and I skidded in the dirt, ramming into a tree. It was a pretty slow hit. The airbags didn't even go off or anything, and I don't think the car was stuck. But I didn't take any chances. I jumped out and started running. I heard one of them chasing me and yelling to the others, but they turned back after a little bit. When I was safe, I stayed in the woods and called 911. When the officers got to the home, all of the men and both cars were gone. My car was never recovered, even to this day. What essentially happened was the group used some random address to lure me into by ordering a pizza, hoping to trap me in. What they were going to do with me is unknown. The fact that one of them chased me makes me think they didn't plan on letting me go. I got lucky that night.